Good to see you, Sam.
Good to see you. Always good to have a chat.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and talk to us a little bit about the NED framework in terms of there's the formal NED structure, which larger businesses have. But off the back of the conversation we had a few weeks back, there's also, in effect, like a non-formal NED framework, which sits in place for lots of different businesses. So we talked a bit about it in terms of the kind of the triangle of free NED advice that sits in the space for SMEs and business in terms of relationship managers, corporate lawyers and accountants. And today we're going to cover that topic in terms of how does that work and how's it evolving. But Sam, if you could give us a little bit of an intro to yourself.
So I'm Sam Freeman. I'm a partner at Lacey Solicitors, and I'm a corporate solicitor heading up our corporate team. So dealing with businesses is my day to day, and of course, whilst there's lots of different sectors, sizes of businesses, actually a lot of the problems or struggles they face, there's some real common themes.
Thank you, Sam. And just to remind to everyone, Steve Paul here, co-founder at Stable. My background is in accountancy, so I kind of can cover off that angle of the accountant piece in this triangle. But Stable obviously represents kind of a proxy for your relationship manager from a banking perspective. So hopefully in this conversation we can cover off all three of those different angles in terms of how's it work. So Sam, let's talk a little bit about like the kind of the traditional model, if we were. So kind of, you effectively had back in the past this bank manager, lawyer, and accountants. But do you want to talk us through just how you kind of see how that can help businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back a little step further, if you like, and you alluded to it in the intro, and that's the kind of the traditional NED. So your non-executive directors, and they're such a useful tool for businesses for bringing in expertise and knowledge that they don't currently have in house, but they can be expensive. It depends on where you source them from. Sorry, and also it's finding the right person. It is really difficult because they've not only got to have that kind of business experience. Ideally, they'll know your sector, and to be blunt, you've got to get on with them. So, and your goals for what you're trying to get out of that relationship have to align with theirs and the amount of time they've got to dedicate. So it's a really, really good route, but it's not for everybody. And even below that, there's a whole host of businesses which would probably class themselves as too small for that, for a formal appointment of some non-executive directors, and yet arguably they're the ones that could really benefit from it the most. So when we talked the other day, the kind of concept that I kind of alluded to was the fact that if you get yourself set up right as a kind of smaller business, and by small I don't mean small, traditionally it's that small and medium-sized businesses is how we describe them. You should have the equivalent of kind of 3 non-executive directors at your disposal for free, and that should be your lawyer, your accountant, and your bank manager. And if you've got those positioned right, they should be 3 individuals who you've built a relationship with, so they understand you, they understand the business. They are people who are dealing with other businesses all the time, so the experience at their fingertips is huge. And they should be people willing to just pick up the phone, bounce an idea around, have a bit of a chat, sense check things for free. And therefore you've got this resource like pool at your fingertips, which far too few people use. And so it's just really kind of enlightening people and encouraging them to get that framework set up and then start using it.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one as well, isn't it? In the fact that what the corporate lawyer or the bank manager also brings is they have clients who are in sector and clients who are out of sector as well. So there's lots of different conversations that might not seem relevant to your individual sector, but that there's actually like a really common problem. Take, for example, the first order, second order, third order impacts of like everything that's going on in Iran at the moment. Like, you're seeing that across multiple different strands. I'm seeing that across multiple different strands. The accountant would be seeing that across multiple different strands. So tapping into that kind of wider knowledge base in terms of, how's it going? What's the problems that you're facing? And you get an honest conversation with someone, and they can kind of, business owners often want to download in terms of what are the things that they're facing. You get an extra angle of, have you thought about this? Because I'm actually seeing this in another client. It's all completely anonymized. You're never going to reveal the secrets of your other clients. but they get that rounded experience of seeing what else is going on in the wider industry and the wider economy.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you that opportunity to see ahead, because your accountant, your lawyer, your bank manager will see things at other parts of the supply chain. So you do get that sort of insight. And let's not forget that all industries have a kind of an inbuilt norm, which is normally just evolved from tradition. And some sectors do things better than others, and there's no reason why they're not copying each other. Following what's a well-trodden route, apart from nobody is crossing the gap between a particular sector or industry. And actually, that's where if you've got, your bank manager, your accountant, your lawyer who is dealing across those different sectors, then you can take some knowledge or experience from one and provide it to another. So, it just works on lots of different angles.
Yeah. And how do you find it, Sam, in terms of like the traditional model that probably scares people in terms of, oh, if I ring my lawyer, they're going to charge me by the minute, which is effectively not true with a good corporate lawyer relationship. But how do you kind of address that kind of fear that people have, which I know that that's not the model that you work, and that's where a lot of this conversation between us has started from, is the synergy in terms of the approach that we take. But there is kind of a stigma attached to certain elements of the industry that is how it can work.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's just a real insight into the fact that I think as an industry we've got it wrong in the past. And so I completely understand that there is this just perception that if I phone, especially a lawyer, that the clock starts running and then an invoice settles its way through the post quite soon afterwards. And and that still exists. I'm not here to say that doesn't, but that's I think when the relationship is wrong. So what it should be, and what I always encourage clients to do, is pick up the phone and have a chat. With me, you're not going to get charged if we have a half an hour chat about something, 5-minute chat about something. It doesn't matter, because that's just part of just us building a relationship. What it allows you to then do is to get better advice in the future, because I understand you, I understand your business better. And sometimes it just means that actually, the project, whatever it might be, is going off on the right path from minute one. Now that has inherent efficiencies rippled throughout. People often think, oh, we'll save some fees and maybe some time, and we'll do as much as we can, and then we'll call the professionals in. And of course, I totally get where they're coming from. But what normally happens is that we then have to unpick everything that's happened. The perception of the parties involved is that they've kind of got some heads of terms that they've agreed, so now they feel they're going backwards. And it's really just to fill in the gaps that could have been dealt with, earlier, if we'd have been engaged earlier. So it normally ends up saving money and time rather than the opposite. But I totally get why the perception is contrary to that.
For Stable, it's been exactly the same in that we've veered away from the concept of a consultant. If you think about what Stable does, we are effectively consultants that businesses can come to in terms of how can we review your financial services provisions across lending, borrowing, payments, and how can we find you efficiencies in those spaces across cost, but also risk management. But the concept of, well, we are a consultant effectively, but we've stayed very, very much away from the concept of charging for consultancy, because there is that stigma attached with consultancy. Whereas we definitely are leaning into this relationship manager angle, because for us, I want to know about your business and I want to help you. That's my key objective. And actually, the more I know about your business, the more I think I can help you down the track. And I think that probably leans into probably kind of a little bit of a continuation of this conversation in terms of like, how do you see these three unofficial NEDs that we talk about, in terms of, we've now established that there doesn't have to be a fee from minute one relationship between the underlying client and this group, and they're actually getting access to a real pool of skills. And you really well put across the fact that actually there's beneficial to you in terms of, if you understand the business, you can actually minimize cost. When it comes to kind of the relationship set, you've got a client now that you've been dealing with for a period of time. They trust you. They'll pick up the phone. They'll have a conversation with you. You're comfortable in the concept that actually, I'm not billing for every minute, but actually I know that there's value in this relationship, because I know enough about this business now that there's probably like either a growth strategy, which involves something like acquisitions, or there's certain elements of the business that they may need disposal, or there's an MBO coming down the line. All of these kind of corporate events present an opportunity for you to kind of be in from the start, understand all the business, understand all the background, and actually support them in the right framework for those kind of longer term conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I think when we talked before, one of the things I mentioned is a bugbear of mine is, a client phones up, asks the lawyer, can you do this? Whatever it might be. And the lawyer says yes, and then goes and delivers what they've been asked to deliver really, really competently, and in line with all of the instructions they were given. And that's great. But there was no thought process, there was no challenge to, is what you're trying to achieve the right thing? And of course, the better you know the business, the more you can weigh into that conversation. And also, was that route of travel, even if it's the right end goal, was that route of travel the most efficient? What did it look like by way of kind of medium or long term consequences? Because often the goal's great, but there's just a better way to get there, to give it sort of longevity, or to survive the next event, whatever that might be, and therefore kind of maximize the benefits you're getting out of it. So it's it's the better you don't have to know the client really well to be able to do that. It's just you can do that quicker. But it is kind of almost challenging the request to see whether it's the best thing to do. And actually, I've had 2 calls with clients this week where they phoned up and the original question was, can you do this? And the answer was yes. It falls perfectly within what we do, and what we've talked to the client about before. But after a bit of a chat, the conversations ended with, actually, there's no legal work needed. The client's on a much better path commercially, so they've saved time and money. And for me, that's good advice. It's not served me well, but it's good advice.
It has served you well in the
Yeah,
longevity of the relationship, and I think this
absolutely.
is maybe where, like, the synergy, I think that form the basis of this original conversation is around. It's the same concept. Like, we both believe in the fact that the longevity of the relationship will bring the customer back, and there's different elements that you can help the customer with down the line, and they will come back because they believe in the advice that you're giving, which doesn't always have to be fee paying.
Absolutely. And to it's just completely rewarding when you've been with somebody through the journey. So lots of my clients, for example, I had a conversation when they first had an idea. There was nothing going on, so it's literally from that acorn stage, and obviously everything in between. But when you can be there at different stages and kind of help that whether that's sort of growth or exit planning or whatever their goal is, you can kind of play your part in it. Then that's even more rewarding than when you do those individual segments for sort of different clients. That's rewarding in itself, but it's not the same as when you kind of, the phrase I like to use is kind of being a kind of part of the decision making process for the clients. That's when it's really rewarding, and actually I think that my role as a lawyer has then been achieved.
I think we had a corporate lawyer in one of my old businesses who effectively became almost like transactional support realistically. And I think we did 5 acquisitions in the 4 years I was there, and it was always nice to see them because you knew you were dealing with them when you were doing something exciting, and they were quite excited because they were part of the journey as well, and it kind of went hand in hand.
And I can almost guarantee that the transaction sort of 5 compared to transaction 1, transaction 1 probably went really well, but transaction 5 probably went even better, just because you'd built that relationship, how each other works, how you like things to be kind of communicated, and therefore it made that transaction for you as on the client side so much easier and better.
And you're learning along the way as well. You're learning, like you say, partly how people work. You are genuinely learning about how the process works as well. Because for everyone to say they know everything about everything is just a complete lie. Every transaction is different. Every transaction has its quirks. Um, but there is a framework that kind of works, and finding the right partner to kind of guide you through it is so important.
Yeah, but then even linking that back then to kind of the 3 pillars of kind of unofficial Ned advice is that whether it's a transaction that's where you're going to get an awful lot of input from the lawyer, if you've got your kind of the bank manager that's trusted and the accountant that's back, the amount that they can feed in as well and kind of help the process, and even better when you've not just got the 3 pillars in people that the client can call and trust, but that they work together. and they're used to working together to help that client, that's when you're really kind of getting, multiples of value, because you've got that team.
Yeah. You also get the network associated with the NEDs that you're dealing with as well, aren't you? In that part of an official NED, obviously it will come from a PLC. And where I was there before, we had official NEDs, and effectively you should be getting access to their network, and they have advisory groups that they can help you with support with. Exactly the same with this kind of non-official NED group, isn't it? In terms of there's first, second, third order consequence of the people that you're dealing with in terms of broadening the horizon of the network, and therefore you may have a question that, that they may not be able to answer, but I'm pretty sure they'll be able to find someone who could help you with it.
Definitely. And the thing with traditional NEDs is that they've normally got very good networks, and to start with, they're normally very open to kind of helping you access those networks. But I always describe it as they are also the sorts of people who are wanted by lots of people, otherwise they're the wrong NED. And they're off to the next shiny toy. Who's the next business that they can help? Unless yours is the one that's growing the absolute fastest, and therefore kind of maintains their focus. So you get some real benefit from them from a network perspective, but for a short period of time. And also, they're probably at a stage where their network is roughly solid. So whilst it's a very, very good network, it's not necessarily growing at the pace it did earlier in their careers. Whereas, with the lawyer, the accountant, the bank manager, their network is constantly changing and expanding. So, if there's a potential introduction one week, in a couple of weeks' time, they've met somebody else who's a potentially good introduction, and if you've got the right person that just believes in helping and adding value to build that relationship, that kind of 3 times multiple of the different people feeding in, the networks are just getting bigger and bigger and fresher, so it's constant.
Yeah, I think that really again plays into what Stable's kind of created to do as well, in terms of, because we're provider agnostic in terms of how we support businesses. Like, traditionally, if you were working with a traditional NED or a traditional bank as your single party relationship manager, you're getting exposure to what they know or what their bank offers. And the reality will be that that is different today to what it was 20 years ago, in terms of the fact the landscape of fintech and financial services is vastly different to what it was 20 years ago. Same with accountants. So again, I've worked with NEDs in the past where head of the audit committee, you go and speak to and you say, I'm considering putting the audit out to tender. And they go, okay, great, go and get 4 quotes from the big 4. And you're like, well, it's probably a bit more than just the big 4. It comes with the lawyers as well, doesn't it? In terms of, I'm considering getting some legal advice. Okay, go and look at the magic circle. Well, it's a much bigger world than that now. And I get that traditionally that was the first port of call, but actually there's certain areas where there's specialty. There's certain areas where actually you get a better relationship based service from having a smaller firm potentially, or a firm just with expertise in that specific sector that you want to work in. But the world is massively changed. I mean, we talk about our sort of loan brokerage side. Like, you talk to someone about the fact, I'm looking to do a transaction. I'm potentially going to need some lending. I need a loan. And that is the viewpoint of a lot of people is, well, I need a loan. You go, well, what type of, not, let's not say loan, let's say what lending product do you actually need? Now, I need a loan or an overdraft, because that's my 2 views of the products that are out there. But actually, there's lots of different products that would actually be better suited to the potential business that you're trying to sell. Maybe actually invoice finance, maybe asset finance, maybe cash flow finance. All of these things are potentially better solutions, but they just don't necessarily know it. And historically, a NED would have told them the advice that they've given previous businesses in the past. But actually, having these kind of these sort of informal NEDs who are closer to day and how it's working, they've got, like you say, their pool of expertise is evolving every single day because of everything else they're working on.
Yeah, and it's staying really current. Because the thing with many NED is that they've been there, they've done it, but then and they're still kind of dipping their toe in with these sorts of appointments, but it's not always as active, and so therefore they are definitely dealing with what they've done really well in the past. Whereas if you've got the right people who are still active, then the advice they're giving, and what they're seeing in the market is kind of bang up to date.
In terms of like, we kind of talked a little bit how the from my side, from the relationship manager side, the world has evolved in terms of the fact that previously you would have one bank and one bank would give you every single service, but actually, like, we genuinely believe there's better value out there for businesses in terms of looking at what is wider available in the market, and people like us can help with that. But how do you see the kind of the modern model has evolved in terms of, traditionally there was kind of these three people who could really help you, and they still really can. You find the right people and the right network, they can really support you. But I don't want to take this conversation totally down an AI kind of wormhole. But in effect, what do you find, Sam, in terms of, there is an evolution? It would be naive to think that the world isn't changing in terms of people think they can get legal support from going in Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whichever tool you want to use. They think they can get accountancy advice. They think they can go and find exactly which is the best bank for the best product for them. And it will get you a proportion of the way. There's an inherent danger in terms of the gap, because the gap is, no matter if it's 1% or 10%, 90% right in a lot of the things that we work in is a big problem. But how are you kind of countering that almost objection as you find it from clients, in terms of, why would I use you when I could just go and look at it on Claude or on ChatGPT?
So there's definitely not a one size fits all. We were all people. We all, we've all got our own kind of way of doing things, and also there's still a massive variation to, what we're finding of how much people are using any AI products and how much they trust them. So quite literally, from the people that use them for everything, can trust what comes out, wholeheartedly, to the never use them and are skeptical of it as a concept anyway. So most people fall somewhere in between. So it's really hard to have this is a general approach, because it's almost finding out what the client's approach to it is. It's a really, really useful tool. And anyone that suggests it isn't, is just not using it right. But the huge risks that come with it are that it's so fundamental what you put in as to what you get out. So if you don't know what information to put in, what bits to challenge, then what you get out will look really, really good and will be in part right, but it only needs to be 1% wrong. And if it's the key 1%, you're totally vulnerable. The whole thing falls apart. So it is a case of embracing it, but our clients don't come to us because we're the cheapest, and generically that's where we find at the moment people who want to just solely rely on AI. They're the people that were just looking to save that bit of money. Our clients value the advice, they value the service. So it's sometimes it's using it to for a quicker simplification of something, but you've still got to make sure it's right. And one example recently was a client that had come with some output, let's call it that, from I think it was ChatGPT, but one of the equivalents. And when you read it, it looked really good. If you would, as a layperson reading it, you'd be like, well, this is bob on. But actually, it was completely and fundamentally incorrect in all regards. But as simple as, if you changed all the wills to will nots or could nots in the advice that had popped out, you could spin it round to it was really good. So as soon as we looked at it and was like, well, this is completely wrong, but actually, if you do that, your advice is now right. But it did really prove to that client that, had they not then called us and said, can you go through this with me, they would have just gone off and been on literally completely the wrong path.
Yeah, I think that is, it's the divergence risk, isn't it? In that you can start on the best path to the end answer and go all the way along in the right direction, but you can so easily trip off. I was working with someone the other day on regulatory capital, actually, and they got a brilliant answer in terms of what's the regulatory capital hold that should happen within a certain type of FCA regulated entity. And they sent it to me, and I read it, and I was like, yeah, but it's wrong. It's not 10%. It's not 25%. It's 10%. Like, what? Why? I was like, well, ask it again and tell them I think it's wrong. I think it's 10%. And lo and behold, the answer comes back and goes, oh, you're right. I've inadvertently picked it up for a different segment of the legislation. So again, this is to our point, in terms of, there's definitely a value add to be had in terms of it can get you a long way, but it can, if it dips off the line at the end, that's a pretty pretty big problem with some of the bits that both of us are dealing with. But it is evolving, it is getting better, and it's an aid for people to come to both of us, I think, with a pretty well informed position that we can then add even more value to for like you say, for a lower cost effectively, because they've done a chunk of the work and they just need to be guided and directed in the right place to kind of finish that job off.
Yeah, and so sometimes the key thing, and I kind of mentioned it before, it's the what you put in will massively affect what you put out. And if you don't know what the key parts of what you're asking for, if it's just a really boxed off, straightforward, like kind of one avenue question, that's slightly different. Although it does have an inbuilt preference to the US. So if you don't sort of specifically say that it's in England, then you're likely to get whatever the law is in the US, for example. But yeah, if you've put in all the right relevant facts and information, it massively increases the chance that what you get is at least usable. In part, but of course, if you don't know what all of those are, and as a sort of lay client, you'll know some of them. If you run the business, you'll know some of the really key parts as well. But if you don't know all of them, the outcome can just be so affected that there's your huge risk.
I think I listened to someone talk about it. It's turbocharged. The problem is you don't know what it's turbocharging. It's either turbocharged output or turbocharged rubbish. And the reality is, which one of those it is completely dependent on how much you know at the start when you ask the question.
Yeah. So you're right. There's a revolution coming, and nobody quite knows where the next, probably 6 months, let alone couple of years, will take us. It's something to be fully embraced, but it's a long way yet from being, a substitute for, for kind of the experience and and cross sectional information that can be gathered from your traditional advisors.
Yeah. I think that's a really good place to maybe end it, Sam, in terms of the fact that is the kind of the end conclusion, really, isn't it? In that the world is evolving. There's a massive change in relation to AI, but there's still a huge place for people and for quality relationships with people who can help you, and the interconnections between those different advisors that you can get your hands on. So, like, if you want to speak to Stable, come and speak to me. If you want to get some great corporate advice, Sam Freeman at Lacey's is your man. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Steve. Really enjoyed that.